All right, so I want to talk about bringing your vector graphics to the next level so they look more real, more realistic. This is a student example in one of my courses. On the right, you'll see um, the image that they're referencing. Never trace over images, but we're referencing for some realism. Um, Now we're looking at this, and the student had some good stuff going on, but what we really are missing is we're really missing kind of that photorealism. Skeuomorphism is a term that gets thrown around a lot or whatever, but there are some things you can do. So I'm just going to talk you through kind of what I did here. So first off, as I'm looking, I'm seeing that there are more levels of detail than we're showing here. So having everything be centered is really important. And when you're centering things, you can select multiple things and then click on one of those objects. And if you click without holding shift on one of the objects that is already selected, then it makes it a keyframe object, and you can align to that. What you'll see me doing a lot here is doing copy, paste in front, or copy, paste in back. And that's Command B for paste in back, or Command F for paste in front. And when you do that, it puts it exactly on top. And then when you select it, you can pull from the center and resize from the center by holding Alt or Option. And as you hold Alt and do that, you can just kind of shrink this down. So especially for things like concentric circles on a watch or something like that, that can be really helpful. So here what I'm doing is I'm just adding a gradient. Now with gradients, it's really important that you just barely change things, right? And I'm just eyeballing this. I'm just trying to get it. Notice how it's a little bit darker on the top, and then it's lighter in the middle, and it's got some darker spots on the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of adjust my gradient until I get roughly the same. Now, I'm not copying this image. I'm creating my own version, my own interpretation of this image. It's not. I'm trying to make it transformative and not derivative. So, in doing that, I'm using my eyes, and I'm trying to see things as much as I possibly can. So you'll notice that I've got concentric circles and concentric rings, and the stops in the middle. What I'm adjusting right now, those are the middle stops in between the colors. You'll see that those are midpoints, and you can adjust the severity or the harshness of that transition, of whether it's a smooth transition if it's somewhere in the middle, or whether it's a fairly severe transition where it starts approaching an actual line if it's closer to one of those color stops. And then what I'm doing right here is you can take some of those things, you can take some of those concentric rings, and you can make them, you can just invert them just by pressing that button, and it'll just switch them. And sometimes that gives you a little bit of a beveled look, or it gives you a little bit of a, just an angle. So it looks like the metal has turned a corner to some extent. So I'm just adding a few more concentric circles here to give the appearance of some glass and some other things. So another thing that you can pay attention to is that a lot of times you'll make the wrong choice, and you'll say, I'm going to do a radial gradient instead of a linear gradient because this is a circle, right? So it should be a radial gradient. Well, the fact of the matter is that it might be a circle shape, but still look at whether it's a linear gradient or not. In this case, because the surface of the circle that we're seeing, the surface of the outer edge is flat, it's linear, right? Because of the direction of the light source. So pay attention to and look at your photo reference, and photo reference multiple things. Look at multiple photos of things and different objects, and you can look at materials. If you're doing a watch, for example, like this one, you don't have to solely rely on that watch. You can also look at how brushed metal looks when it's reflected in light, or how glass appears on a bunch of different clocks, or how glass works when it's a window or when it's in a car, or things like that. So take all that in and look at how the light defines the form. Now here, I'm doing something where there's a little bit in the middle. If you can see, there's a little ridge in the middle of that. So I just made a copy of that gradient. I changed the angle slightly, and then I just dropped the opacity down to 20 so that it would blend a little bit. You can also use blending options in that case, and that can help somewhat. Here's a little trick that is useful, is going from one hue to the same hue on a color stop, and then just making a minor adjustment. And if you select that color stop, notice that the triangle turns black, then you can jump to your eyedropper tool and you can eyedrop things. But you notice that's a little muddy, and I'll adjust that in a minute. If you can press G to get to your gradient tool, you can adjust the shape. And if you notice, the reference photo is showing us that the shape is a little bit more of an oval than it is actually a circle. So I'm going to try to adjust this gradient in such a way that it will create a more realistic look. Okay, and then I'm going to blend it to the outside. So you see that it kind of bleeds off at the top there, and I'm trying to get this oval so that it's shaped. And as you look, I'm seeing a fairly hard edge, so I'll adjust that middle a little bit. And then I'm hoping here that I adjust my colors, because that's a little too dark. It's a little too extreme. So I'm either going to turn down, let's see what I do here. I'm either going to turn down my opacity, or I'm going to adjust that stop. So we'll see what's going on. But I'm just trying to get the shape right of that gradient real quick. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to make that a little bit lighter, take some black out, take out some of the K value. And I'm just eyeballing it right now to try to get that color. There we go. Now it's looking a little bit better. That got a little worse. So just kind of adjust until you get it to be a little bit more realistic. Then you will look and you'll see that there are different things going on. There's things going on with the glass. You'll notice that the face of the watch is recessed in, and that causes some shadows as well. You notice tiny little things. One of the most important things about skeuomorphism or photorealism is that beginners use strokes way too much. I'm trying to do as much of this with shape as I possibly can. So the more shapes or the more objects that I have that do not have a stroke but I'm using the fill, the better off I'm going to be. So just minor tweaks here. Notice that I'm rotating just a little bit one way or the other, just trying to get this to work. And then I'm that Command C, Command F is going to be a copy paste in front. So I'm going to experiment a little bit here with trying to make this look like glass. So I do some blending options, which are under your transparency palette. I'm going to turn that completely white or completely blue here, so it's a solid color. And then if I can just bring it just inside just a little bit, it's going to give me some shadow options. So you notice where my light source is coming from. I'm going to create a shape here that gives me some options for the shadow. And I'm probably going to cut this. So I'm going to grab both of those shapes. I'm going to go Shift M to grab my shape builder tool, hold Alt to delete, and then I'm going to grab a color. Right. So I'm going to try to get this color to be gradiated, right? So that it blends, so that it fades, because it's not going to be a consistent shadow all the way through. So I'm going to rotate that to 90 degrees, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to fade it out. So notice that it's starting to fade a little bit. So I'm going to get my color stops to be where I want them to be. I'm probably going to make that 0%, and notice that you have a linear fade from the top to bottom, and then it kind of just adds a little bit of a fade there, and that's going to indicate light source. So I'm going to have two light sources that are coming kind of from the top on either side, and if I fade those, then and I get that midpoint to kind of fade a little bit more gradually, then it's going to add just a touch of that edge, and it lowers the face, and it kind of indicates some form. So indicating form with light and shadow is really important here. So as I zoom in, I'm just kind of checking some different things. The shadows here could be done a little bit better, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to adjust some of those shadows. I don't think that they should actually have a gradient, so I'm just going to darken them. I'm going to put a multiply, and then I'm going to change my opacity down. So doing multiply blends down. It blends down. Notice I'm in the transparency panel there, and choosing multiply will blend that down. Making a copy of something and then pasting it, and then dropping that down, you can, I think I'm going to work on the center here. So this is going to be kind of a greenish. I'm going to make it look like that paint that glows, that material that glows, but it's going to be recessed in. So as I recess this in, it's going to give it just a little bit of realism there. And sometimes you have to just kind of try a second time to get your anchor points. So white arrow tool, grabbing the anchor points that I want, and then I'll move them in just slightly because it's on the inside of this. Notice that there are a couple extra anchor points on occasion. It's always good to clean those up. And when you clean those up, it'll really help with your lines and your cleanliness. It also helps with management of the file if you want to go and adjust something later. So trying to be as clean as possible, as few anchor points as possible is always good. So I'm going to grab this, copy, paste in front, and then I'm going to just adjust one part of it, and that one part is just going to give me a little bit of an edge. Remember that my source, my light source, is coming from the upper right and upper left. So if this is recessed in a little bit, then I would just have a touch of a cast shadow on that top edge. And that's what I'm trying to indicate now. So just add an anchor point and then move that up a little bit. And then as it approaches that circle, maybe it has another shadow there. So notice how that little bit of a shadow, just that touch of a shadow, adds quite a bit of realism and indicates form. So now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to grab all these things, and I'm trying to avoid a tangent here. So I've got kind of an issue where it's hitting that minute hand in a spot that I don't like. So just if you alt-click with the rotate tool, then it'll center that crosshairs, your pivot point, and you can kind of adjust it from there. So I'm going to stick it in between one of those so that it doesn't cause tangent issues. It's just a lot easier. I realize that on a real watch that there are times, many times, when the minute hand is going to cross over one of those things, and that's fine, but it just causes some issues from a design standpoint. And in a perfect world, I can control that. So now I'm going to make a copy, paste, and back, and make that shadow again from the shape. Put it at about half opacity, and blend it with the multiply blending option in the transparency palette. And doing that is going to be nice because now I can grab this, do the same, copy, paste, and back, and then I'm just going to use my arrow tools to drop it ever so slightly, eyedropper tool to grab that, and I can do that multiple times on multiple objects. Once I get that style, that layer style, that object the way that I want it, then it'll allow me to just copy that, so I don't have to do those settings each time. So copy, paste, and back, Command C, Command B, or copy, paste in front is Command C, Command F, and those are really useful because they put it exactly where you want it. Now, one of the things that I'm doing here is I'm trying to make sure that there's some separation of these objects. They were all the same color before, the different hands, the second hand, the minute hand, and the hour, and having that tiny little shadow, that little sliver of a shadow on the disc in the middle is going to separate those. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I've done before. So I'm using the eyedropper tool to grab that same color. I'm going to create this green, then I'm going to copy, paste in front. Now I'm going to take my anchor points, and I'm just going to adjust those anchor points just slightly so that I can create that little ridge, right? So I'm going to get these to be where I want. For some reason, I'm doing it one at a time here. Don't ask me why. Oh, it's because there's probably extra anchor points. So if I can get rid of those extra anchor points. Hitting minus is the shortcut for your pen tool for subtract anchor points. Now that I've got kind of the shape that I want, I can drag all three of them down. Okay, hopefully I zoom out here so I can see what's going on. Okay, so now I'm going to copy, paste in front, and I'm going to use my white arrow tool to select one of those anchor points. And I'm doing this to create that little ridge, right? So when I grab that, I can zoom in here, and I can eyedrop the shadow color that I got before, which really I did just by adding a little bit of saturation to that. And then I can just move those two anchor points, and it gives me that ridge. Okay, and I'm trying to match styles here so they look consistent. Now here, if you think about how this works, and if you look at your photo reference, but if you think about how this works, there's going to be multiple concentric circles because each one of these hands is going to be controlled by an independent pivot point. So what I'm doing here is I'm experimenting a little bit to see if a gradient would be a good idea. And a lot of times, if you go from linear and you just do just a slight, notice that that's probably like a 10% grade. I didn't quite look at the number, but it's not very much different. Okay, and then copy paste in front, move it just inside while I'm holding Alt, and switch that, copy paste in front, move it just inside again, and then reverse that gradient, or grab circle, grab that white. Okay, now that gives it kind of a beveled look. I'm not really happy with that beveled look, so I'm going to come in and I'm just going to change some things just a little bit here. And so I'm going to grab just one of these, copy paste and back, bring it just outside, make that white. Now what I'm going for here is I'm going for that look where each one of these hands has its own little circle, has its own little pivot point, and too heavy use of gradient or too much gradient showing, especially if the gradient is in grayscale, is going to give this away that it's not really connected well. So I'm just going to continue to adjust this and try some different things. Get my size to be a little bit smaller here so that it looks more detailed. Things that are smaller often look more detailed. Make sure that they're centered on each other, and then that kind of indicates, you know, a little pivot point there, so that's fine. Might make a couple more minor adjustments, just a little bit, one here, one there. Zooming in is really helpful on stuff like this. Excuse me. And then I'm trying to indicate a light source so it's not just directly on top, so it looks raised. And the further away that shadow goes, the higher that looks, because we're on dead on. Okay, now this part is a little bit tricky because we're going to do something. Now there's a number of ways that you could do this. You could make each one of those triangles and then try to color them appropriately. But what I'm going to look is if you squint, you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a V going on, a V highlight, and then inside of that there's a triangle of shadow. So if I can indicate that, remember that an illustration is a facsimile, it's an illusion, it's an indication of a thing. It's not actually a thing. So there's no way for me to make this look exactly like that thing, but I can indicate that shape, and then your mind will make up the difference. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a V. So let's zoom in here so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to create a V, and that V is going to be a little bit darker. And this will give me kind of a range. So what I'm doing here is a trick that gives you kind of a 5-point value range between values. So I'm going from the lightest point to the darkest point, and then I go to Object, Blend, hit Blend, Blend Options. Oh, I must have something selected. It was that image. I had that image selected. So just the objects, just the object selected, then Object, Blend, Make. Okay, and then Object, Blend, Blend Options, and if you change the spacing to specified steps and put 3 or 2, you can see that there's a couple steps in the middle, and now I've got a value range from dark to light, and that value range I can eyedrop that. You can also create swatches, you can create global key colors and things like that, but this is a quick way to just do it on the fly. So I'm just going to come in here, and this is the one time where I'm just going to get that angle right. Okay, but once I have that angle right, I can make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to use a stroke on this one. I'm going to make that stroke slightly darker. Okay, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to use my width tool to vary the stroke. Just the plain stroke is never really that good, but if you can vary the width, if you can make it a little bit more interesting, if you can make it look like you drew it, or you can make it look, because nothing is a perfect line, right? So once I get that, then I'm going to take my black arrow tool. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt as I drag down. And once I do that once, then I press Command D, and it'll copy my last actions. If If you want to learn more about that, you can watch my video on the align and distribute. No, I'm sorry, the rotate and reflect. And what I did there is I just copied and pasted it in front, and then I held Alt as I switched. I just drug the bounding box to the left so that it switched sides. Adjusting the stroke weight. Okay, but notice how each one of those lines tapers off at the end. That's a level of detail that is really helpful. Because if you just use the default stops, then it's not very good. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going to align this box with those so that they are aligned and they're traveling in the same thing. But I'm going to create the I'm going to make a copy here so that I don't mess this up. But I'm going to create the illusion of a reflection. Okay, so that reflection is just going to be a little bit lighter than everything else. I'm going to drag it off because I'll mask this later once I get my shape the way that I want it. But notice that I'm counting, there's 3 rows of lit triangles. Okay, and then I'm going to use my reflect tool by pressing O, and I make a copy of that, and then I use my black arrow tool to drag that up, holding shift while I do that so it constrains the direction that I'm dragging it. And then you get that little V, right? So you see that little V that I'm going for. Now if I mask this, so I'm going to come in like that, and Command Y is a really useful keystroke. And then I'm just going to cut that a little bit with my shape builder tool, because I'm trying to create this edge over here on the left. And notice how it kind of tapers and comes in, and creating an edge there will be good. So I remember indicating the illusion of the watch, but it's not actually the watch, right? If it were actually the watch, you would see it in person. So using your anchor point tool to adjust and manipulate the handlebars and the anchor point and give it that little bit of a curve. There are probably more precise ways to do this, but this is a smaller element, so I'm not terribly concerned about being precise. You can make little tweaks with the white arrow tool as well by pressing A. Okay, so once I make these final adjustments and I get these the way that I want it to go, I notice that there's a tiny little bit of a highlight in the middle there. So I'm going to copy paste in front. I'm going to try a few different things to try to get this highlight going. And I'm going to adjust these and bring these up because that highlight is really only as that starts to curve. So you'll notice like a little highlight there. It looks a little strange, so I'm going to try this again. Okay, so copy, paste in front. I'm going to get the shadow going now, so I'm going to grab that one. Okay, put that all the way on the top, and then blend it. And that way, everything, including the highlight, has that little bit of indication, that little bit of shadow that there's a watch next to it, right? So you've got the watch face that's going to cast a little bit of a shadow. Now I'm just going to mask everything, so I draw a shape over the top, select it all with a black arrow tool. Not quite, there we go. Wait for my smart guys to tell me that it's actually lined up. There we go, right there. Okay, now grab everything and then press Command 7, and that gives me my mask. You can also go to Object Mask Make. Okay, and then I'm just going to put this over there where the watch is. Okay, and notice that level of realism. I'll throw that behind everything so that it fits behind. Get rid of that because I don't need that anymore. There we go. Okay, use Command Shift left bracket to throw that behind. Okay. And then get some alignment going on. Notice how I made the face of the watch a key object, and it didn't move, but the knob did move. And now just kind of take a look and see if there's anything else that I can do to make some final adjustments here. So I see that there is a date and time thing going on, so I'm going to get rid of that number 3, and I'm going to put the, you can put whatever date you want. I think I'll just do 21 here just to stay consistent with my photo. And then we're going to make it look recessed in. So remember how we dropped the face by adding a shadow on the edge? We're now going to drop this by adding a shadow on the edge. So it's white, but I'm going to give it a little bit of a grayscale gradient, and that grayscale gradient will allow just a touch of shadow, right? So let's see how we do this here. Go linear. We'll probably change it to 90 degrees, I would imagine. There we go. Okay. So now that's 90 degrees. We'll do negative 90 because I want it to be at the top. And then I'm going to back this off a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to change the opacity down. Okay, and then I'll change that stop so that it seems like an edge. Okay, so I'm just going to adjust. Gradients, remember, are all about subtlety. They're all about little minor changes. If you do huge, big changes in gradients, it's never going to look good. So throw that on the top there and realize that I used opacity, so it's actually going to blend down. So I need to make some minor corrections here. So double-clicking on a group will bring you into isolation mode. And that's what's going on here in the top left where you see layer and group, and then you can kind of do some things. So I added an object there. So we are going to adjust this gradient a little bit more so that it looks slightly better. So we need to grab all of these objects and bring them on top of that object. And this is where having your layers palette. I didn't start this file. This is a student's file. So this is where having your layers palette is really useful, because I could have put all these hands on one layer and then just move the whole layer, and that would have been really useful. But anyway, if I separate that, bring it on top, make sure I'm selecting the things that I want to select by pressing Command Y, and that gives me that. But I accidentally selected the center of all the face things, so I've got to redo this again. There we go. All right, so let's throw this to the back. That'll probably be easier. When you create your own objects and you're not working on somebody else's file, make sure to keep your layers palette organized. And as you keep your layers palette organized, it will be really, really beneficial. Okay, so I'm just going to make a little copy, and then I'm going to multiply, and that's just going to add just a touch of, I might change that even to black. That's just going to add just a touch of extra shadow there. So get rid of the stroke on that, and then I'm going to change that to multiply, and I'm going to blend that down by changing the opacity. Make that even smaller. Okay, remember we're going for detail here. Okay, so that's going to give me my top edge, and then I'm going to just come in and I'm going to add an anchor point so that I can have a bottom edge too, or a right side edge, sorry. Bring that over just a little bit. Okay, now just making these little minor adjustments, that's going to indicate a light source, right? So the light source that it's indicating is saying that this is lower than the face, and the light source is coming from the upper right. Okay, so notice how that kind of looks like it's actually inset into the watch. Okay, so now I'm just kind of looking, and I'm looking back at my reference, and I'm noticing that I've got this shape. Okay, we'll throw that to the top so that we can see it. And the shadows in this shape would not be served by a gradient. Okay, if you look at that, the shadow is curved. It's indicating a specific type of form. So a quick way to do this is to drag a copy of that and then use that copy to cut the shape. So it gives you a highlight, and then you can hold Alt again and drag a copy, and then select the other object, and you can use that to create a shadow. And you're just looking at how that actually ends up, right? Looking at how it looks. And what will happen is that if you look with your eyes instead of with what you think is going on, right? Your symbol system in your mind is not going to give you an accurate representation of what things actually look like, because your symbol system in your mind is too simplistic. So I'm looking at the shape and I'm just trying to match the shapes. I'm not thinking about, a watch here, I'm just thinking about value and shape. Okay, so that's going to give me a little indication there. That's probably a little too dark, so I'll probably soften that a little bit. And this is where you can do a couple things. One is that you could have this be a gradient. So I could come in here like this, and I could drag that stop down, get rid of these other stops, and then I'm just going to create an opacity gradient, so it goes from the same hue to the same hue, but change the gradient. And notice how it fades. It gives it a little bit of a fade there. Change my angle to, I'm going to step that up just with the arrow tools, and that'll give me just a little bit of a fade. So it's just a touch more realistic, and I didn't have to use an effect, right? If you go to the effect menu, then you start to introduce raster issues. A lot of people might use, like a blur or something in that situation, but if I'm in Illustrator, I try to keep everything vector as much as I possibly can. Sometimes I'll use effects, but so I want that to fade in, so I'm just using the gradient tool to make some minor adjustments and to get it to look a little bit more realistic. And now when you look at that, I still have that shape, but I want to bring the opacity up a little bit so there's a little bit of an edge. So there's my little bit of an edge, okay? And that detail there is going to look significantly better than just a shape, or if I just tossed a gradient on the top or whatever. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this there and line it up with that watch and throw it all the way to the back, okay? But I still want to indicate that there's a little bit of an edge. So here's another thing that you can do is grab this, hit hit O, press Alt, and then copy it, right? Because it's basically the same shape. Okay, and then throw that band to the back so it looks like the band is, not overlapping there. Okay, and then I can do the same thing down underneath. Okay, those are basically the same shape, so I'm going to grab all of that and all of that, and I'm going to hit O again for reflect, and then I'm going to Alt-click, reflect across a horizontal axis this time, hit copy, not OK, and then that'll copy that down. Okay, and I think I throw that to the back. Okay, so now you see that those shapes, and if I wanted to, I could come in and I could indicate different things, but I'm going to cast a shadow. Okay, so Alt-drag, and then I'm just going to click that guy and that guy, get out my shape builder tool, and I'm going to delete every part of that circle that I just created except for what overlapped. So notice how I still have that little curve, and because I used the actual shape, that curve is going to be an exact copy. It's going to be an exact copy of the other curve. Now if you hold Shift when you click on something, then it gives you the color right at that point rather than all of the attributes. So if you just eyedropped and didn't hold Shift, then it would grab that gradient. But I didn't want the gradient, I wanted the color, right? Change the blending mode to multiply. If you want, you can adjust these. And I'll throw this down a little bit darker and change the opacity. And then I'll change the angle. Okay, and remember that gives me just a touch of a fade. Okay, so we're doing okay there. But we just need to make some minor adjustments. So if you hit your G for gradient, then you can kind of move and manipulate those color stops and that midpoint on those gradients, and then it gives you that little bit of an edge. Zoom in a little bit here. You can kind of see that makes it so that we indicate a light source. Now we'll work on the band. Now the band, I just want to make it look like it's not flat. So I grab the shape, Alt drag, and then I'm going to use Shift M for my shape builder tool to cut that shape, and then I can color this shape. So I'm going to double click there, and then I can just make minor adjustments on the color, and notice how it just gives it a little bit of an edge. All right, and you can see that edge over in the reference just slightly, but I'm going to exaggerate it just a little bit. Okay, so then once I have that, I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to go O, Alt-click, hit copy, okay, and then I can throw that to the back. But remember, we have this shadow, right? We're going to have this shadow, so I'm going to Alt-drag, or copy, paste, and back, and then drag, and I'm going to cast a shadow with that. So I'm going to grab all of that and delete it, okay, and then I'm going to grab this guy, eyedrop that color, and then I'll go to multiply, which will give me a little bit of a cast shadow, and that shadow matches both the curvature of the shadow on those two little prongs on the bottom, and it indicates that the face is raised and above the band. Okay, so now you just zoom in, take a look at all the different circles, and you can notice that there are still a few differences there that I need to adjust. So now I'm going to start to work on trying to make it look like there's some glass. So copy paste in front that mid circle, bring it just inside, because as glass reaches the edge of something, it has an edge, and that edge is either going to be a sharp beveled edge or it's going to curve and round, but either way there's an edge there. So just doing a little bit of a multiply on that is going to help that. Copy paste in front again, bring it just inside. Notice I'm just barely moving things here, and you can almost not even tell what's going on. Screen. So there's that edge. That shows that the watch, or the watch face, the circle, hit an edge, turned, is catching the light, but then also catches some shadow. So notice that there's multiple levels of concentric circles that indicate form. Okay. Now I'm just going to take one of those and I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm going to create a reflection. So once I cut that in half, I'm going to use my shape builder tool, and then I'll change this reflection to probably screen. And notice how it does that, and then I can change the opacity down a little bit. Now I still have my shadows, but my shadows are underneath that glass. So if my shadows are underneath that glass, then the reflection is going to actually lighten the value of those shadows. And I've got some weird little cut thing that I've got to deal with here, so let's grab that and just get rid of it. Not exactly sure what's going on there, but I don't like it, so I need to investigate further here. So let's zoom in. Okay, so it's a weird little shape, so I'm just going to figure out what that line is and delete it, and then move everything back up. All right, so now that I got rid of that weird little line, I want to actually have this be slightly curved glass. So I'm going to adjust my anchor points here just a little bit, so that it looks like it bends. Instead of being perfectly flat, I want it to bend just a little bit. So if you use your convert or your anchor point tool, you can just grab the center of a line and just kind of pull it up. Notice that that slight little curve just adds an indication of curvature on the glass as well. So there you go. You know, that in no way is exactly what you should do every time, air quotes or whatever. This is just some of my process that I would go through if I were to just try to add a little skeuomorphism or photorealism to some vector graphics. So hopefully that helped. Don't just copy what I do, though. Remember, don't just copy this, but just use the concepts and the process and my thinking and apply it to your own creations. Okay, it's completely useless to follow step by step what somebody else does, because you're just mimicking them. But if you can create your own ideas and your own thinking based on the ideas and the thinking and the processes and the tools that I've used here, then you can create really good looking stuff.